that never ends.
These are the moments you dream of. Stanley Cup champions.
You're watching Rogers TV.
You guys are? Right on. Okay, so just to quickly reintroduce myself, my name's Terry Pitcher. I'm a business development specialist with Chevron Canada Limited, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about the evolution of engine oil. One thing I will point out quickly first, just a quick little anecdote. This is the largest audience I've ever had turn out for a lubricants presentation before. Actually, I will say I did have one audience that was bigger. I was asked to do a technical presentation at a construction symposium in Regina, and scheduled to hit the stage at 11 in the morning. And right before I walked up on the stage, they announced that the bar was open. And of course, there was a mass exodus to the open bar in the lobby. So I think that officially makes you guys the largest audience I've ever had. So I appreciate you coming out. Obviously we wouldn't have much to explore today if it wasn't for some of these very early developments, right? And so the first commercial oil well was established in Titusville, Pennsylvania by Edwin Drake in 1859, right? And prior to that, vegetable oils and animal fats were really widely used for lubrication. And obviously after the discovery of petroleum, that started to displace those animal fats and vegetable oils. So about a decade later, Rockefeller's Standard Oil developed vacuum distillation. It's a process for refining crude, whereby we can extract, by weight, the different, products from the crude. So, the more heavyweight asphaltic compounds, and separate them from, sort of the mid-weight, like base oils and things like that. And then obviously the lighter ends, like fuels and solvents, right? So in 1876, the first internal combustion engine was invented by Nicholas Otto. And then about a decade later, Carl Benz fully developed the automobile. And then in 1893, the first diesel engine was created by Rudolf Diesel. And of course, that's what the engine is named after, and then eventually the petrol fuel. But a really interesting anecdote on Rudolf Diesel is the engine that he debuted at the 1900 World's Fair actually ran on 100% peanut oil. So maybe the first iteration of biodiesel, Okay, of course that brings us to 1908, when the Ford company rolled out the Model T, right? And that would bring, automobiles to the masses and obviously drive demand for more robust lubricants and formal specifications, right? So I believe there were 15 million Model Ts produced, right? But by the time the end of production. That led to the Society of Automotive Engineers, of which Henry Ford was a founding member, establishing the first viscosity grades, okay? And they started with just the initial 10 straight grades, right? So SAE 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And then in 1919 marks the formation of the American Petroleum Institute, and they would play obviously a pivotal role in engine oil development. They would roll out, very stringent motor oil standards in the decades to come. And then the 1920s saw the introduction of detergents in engine oils to fight deposits and sludge and varnish and gum. All right, that brings us to wartime era. They say that necessity is the mother of all invention, and so I think I would suggest that if that's the case, then warfare might be the wicked stepmother of all innovation, because there really was a lot of development in the lubricant space during wartime. This was when Germany really ramped up their efforts to develop synthetic oils. obviously because their access to crude was restricted by the Allies, but also because they were finding that their equipment couldn't perform, particularly in the extreme Arctic conditions in Russia. The petroleum oils that they were using to lubricate their equipment was failing them, and it actually led to them. It led to Hitler actually formally declaring his first official loss in the war at Stalingrad. During this time, German scientists experimented with over 3,500 different ester-based synthetic fluids. And in the meantime, the US military continued to further develop synthetic oils for jet fighters. All right. Next was probably one of the most significant developments in the lubricant space, in the lubricants industry, and that's the introduction of zinc dialkyl dithiophosphate as an anti-wear additive. Okay, and the first patent for ZDDP was issued to the Lubrizol Corporation. And the reason why this is so significant is I don't think current modern equipment could achieve the speeds and pressures and loads that we currently do without zinc anti-wear additive. And when we get into a little bit more of the technical part of the presentation, I'll explain exactly how zinc works. All right, the 1947 marks the first time that the American Petroleum Institute actually developed and rolled out motor oil standards. Okay, and they started with two motor oil classifications. One was regular, and then the second one was premium heavy duty. And these categories would evolve into the categories that we have now for gasoline and diesel engine oils, the S categories for gas engines, and the C categories for diesel oil that we'll explore a little bit later. 1952 marked the first multi-grade oil introduced. And then when we get into 1974, we see the first commercially available synthetic engine oil hit the market. Okay? And we probably all know what that is. That was Mobil 1, right? One of the most popular synthetic motor oils ever. Okay, but before we get too far away from the wartime era stuff, a story that I really like to share is the birth of our Dello brand. So our Dello is our heavy duty brand for diesel engine oils, and it really originated with the U.S. military, who would stencil. It was part of their requirements that we stenciled on the drums what the oil was for, what the application was. So you can see on there stenciled, RPM was the brand, and diesel engine lubricating oil, so they didn't know where to put it. And this was the first time that a diesel engine oil was ever compounded, right? So this is when compounded simply means we're adding additives to enhance the characteristics of the oil and to enhance the performance of the equipment. And this was significant for the US military because up until that point, they'd been lubricating their submarine engines with straight mineral oil. And unfortunately, when a submarine's engine requires an overhaul or any kind of maintenance, that submarine has to rise to the surface. Now, of course, the submarine sitting on the surface is a sitting duck, right? So early submarines actually had very limited, short routes because they'd have to constantly return to shore for maintenance, right? And when we rolled out the RPM compounded diesel engine oil, we enabled the US Navy to actually triple their cruising range on their submarines. And that was touted by the US military as a significant factor in our success in their success in World War II. In fact, I think Chevron was the first company ever publicly acknowledged by the US government and military for their contribution to the war effort. So I think that's a pretty kind of a cool story. Okay, so getting into some of the sort of more technical side of things here now and explain how some of this stuff works. I mentioned ZDP and its importance in the lubricants industry and how it functions. So basically, zinc is chemically attracted to the metal inside the application, right? It adsorbs onto the metal surface, but it requires heat to activate it. And so when it gets the appropriate amount of heat, what we get is a phosphorus-containing anti-wear film that creates a sacrificial layer, if you will, that protects the metal, and that sacrificial layer wears away and prevents, what we call boundary contact or metal-to-metal contact. All right, I also mentioned the introduction of multi-grade oils in the early 50s. And basically one of the biggest challenges with lubricants and oil is that, it's susceptible to changes in viscosity with changes in temperature, right? And that's actually referred to as an oil's viscosity index. So, an oil obviously gets thick when it's cold, thins out when it gets up to operating temperature. And what we do is we can use a polymer called a viscosity index improver, add that into the oil, and make it behave like a multigrade. So you'll see on the graph on screen that that black line on the bottom, that would be representative of an SAE 10W oil and how it behaves, right? You can see as the temperature increases, the product gets less viscous and it starts to thin out. And a 30 grade has much the same behavior, just a little bit more viscous, right? What we can do is we can take these polymers, these VI improvers, blend them into, say, a 10 weight oil, and then make it behave like a 30 at operating temperature, right? So that's how we create multi-grade oils. Okay, and these viscosity index improvers, the way that they behave in the oil is essentially when the oil is cold, they're very compact, they're kind of sitting on themselves. You can almost, there's a couple different analogies we use, but one of them that we use quite often is, you think about an octopus and it's cold and it's got all its arms all, holding itself together, trying to stay warm. But as temperature increases, these polymers sort of open up, and the octopus relaxes and he spreads his arms out. And what happens is eventually they expand so much that they start to get closer together and they're not so compact. And all of those fibers in that polymer actually increase the internal friction of the fluid, which helps it maintain viscosity. And it also helps the oil molecules sort of stay together so they don't separate as much as they would if they weren't there, right? Which then helps the viscosity of the fluid as well. Now, one of the major downsides to the viscosity index improvers, initially when they were first rolled out, is that they are susceptible to shear, okay? They can shear down in the very tight tolerances inside, say, an engine or inside an application. If you think about, maybe between the ring and liner or in the valve train, and literally those little fibers will shear off, and then the polymer will become smaller, and that unfortunately has a negative impact on the viscosity, and we start to see viscosity loss. And that was a challenge actually with the very early multi-grade oils. We did see that actually. One of our competitors had a pretty significant problem with viscosity loss in the application after a very short period of time. Now, since then, there's been major advancements in VI improvers, and we're now developing very, very shear stable viscosity index improvers and polymers that can resist that shearing action in the engine. All right, so we touched on synthetics, and if we're going to have the continued discussion about synthetics, it helps to understand why they perform better. So here we've got a couple of examples. On the left there, you can see conventional oil molecules, and you notice that they're kind of various shapes and sizes, and unfortunately there's some impurities kind of spread out through in there. And then on the right-hand side where, the synthetic oil molecules, you can see they're all very uniform in size and shape, and you get a really nice even layer of molecules there, right? Now what that does for us is three things. One, it creates a very nice, strong, even film, right? So very, very good film strength, very few weak spots or weak points. The other thing it does is those very uniform molecules actually roll over each other very well. So it gives us very good viscosity control. And then of course those impurities in the more conventional oil, those could eventually be things like sulfur that could lead to oxidation and acid and the eventual breakdown of the oil. So, that's really where the strengths of synthetic oil come in, right? All right, time for a quick break for me, and then maybe for you guys too. We've got a quick little video here on the benefits of synthetic oil.
Have you noticed that more and more vehicles come with a recommendation for full synthetic motor oil? Ever wonder why this is?
Well, it's because government fuel economy regulations are driving auto manufacturers to produce lighter, smaller displacement engine technologies that make the desired horsepower while delivering better fuel economy.
As engines downsize to reduce weight, we are now seeing small 1.5-liter turbocharged engines that make as much power as much larger, older engines once did. Pickups and SUVs that once had large displacement V8s are now powered by 3 to 4.6-liter engines.
These smaller engines work harder under increased pressure and generate more heat. Turbochargers commonly used to generate more power in these high-output engines are cooled by the oil, adding to the engine heat load. Smaller engines have smaller oil sumps, so we have less oil working harder to do the same big job. The combined increase in heat and pressure, the decrease in oil volume, joined with longer oil change drain intervals, is putting unprecedented stress on engine oil. The heat from these exhaust gases that spin the turbo is hard on the engine oil because it has to lubricate the smoking hot turbo bearing, thus the need for an engine oil that can take the heat.
By the way, many manufacturers are starting to use an afterpump, which keeps pumping oil through the turbo bearing after the vehicle is turned off. This allows the bearing to cool and helps the oil that would be sitting in the heat to avoid being oxidized. This is where synthetic oil comes in. Automakers require full synthetic oil because of its abilities to absorb an incredible heat load and protect the engine at extreme operating temperatures without breaking down.
This is an important distinction. When an automaker requires synthetic oil, it's not just because it's better for the engine. It's because synthetic oil is essential to protecting the engine. Conventional oil just isn't up to the task. It's prone to evaporation in the extremely hot, high-friction areas of the engine. When conventional motor oil evaporates, some brands can leave behind sludge. Not good. Sludge is literally a petroleum jelly. It blocks small oil passages, starving vital engine parts from oil that cools and lubricates, greatly accelerating engine wear.
Full synthetic oils can also meet the manufacturer's extended oil service intervals, some that may run 5,000 to 10,000 miles, with the help of an onboard oil life monitoring system. For those vehicles that are not required to use full synthetic oil, it can still be offered as an upgrade to provide superior engine protection against the 5 causes of wear that cause engine failure: pressure, heat, abrasion, corrosion, and acid.
All right, so, carrying on this conversation with synthetics, I think it's probably a good time to kind of explain the different base oil categories, right? So the American Petroleum Institute has 5 official base oil categories, starting with Group 1, which is typically it's an older technology now. It's a solvent refined base oil where they take solvent, they dump it into the feedstock, heat it up, blend it around, and then they extract the solvent, in an effort to pull all the impurities out with the solvent. Unfortunately, it's not particularly effective. It does develop base oils of lower quality, and unfortunately contains too much sulfur to be used for current passenger car motor oil specifications. Still has plenty of applications where, it works just fine, can work perfectly well for certain gear oils and things like that, but not used in engine oils anymore. The second category is a mineral oil as well. It's called Group 2. And this is where we start we get away from that solvent refining, and we use hydrogen as a catalyst. Okay, we introduce hydrogen as a catalyst, and we actually change those impurities. We crack the molecules and turn them into good lubricating oil molecules, right? That gives us a little bit of a benefit over Group 1, a big benefit in performance, but now actually starting to provide even a little bit of a price benefit. So the price gap is closed, and Group 2 is actually maybe surpassed Group 1 price-wise or in affordability, because we get higher yields, because instead of pulling the garbage out, we're actually converting the garbage into good lubricating oil, right? Group 3 is the same thing. It's also mineral oil from the ground that's just subjected to even more severe hydrotreating. We call it hydrocracking, right? So a much, much more severe process. Similar purity to Group 2, but with much higher viscosity index base oils, right? So Group 4 is a group all on its own, and it's literally polyalpha olefins. So that's the traditional thinking of what a synthetic base oil for passenger car motor oils would be, and entirely man-made. And then Group 5 is all other types of synthetics. Anything and all other types of base oils. Anything's not included in Group 1 to 4. All right, and those could be of varying quality, from very, very high quality, very low quality, but generally tend to be sort of lower volumes, very, very sort of niche products. There are actually a couple of unofficial categories, really more marketing terms that oil companies use to sell these premium base oils, and that's Group 2 Plus. It's just really sort of a very, very high premium Group 2. And more recently, the introduction of a Group 3 Plus, which includes gas to liquid technology, or gas to liquid oils, which you may have heard of, which really is taking natural gas and subjecting it to that hydrocracking process that I mentioned, which creates a wax as a feedstock that then they do what they call an isomerization process to get these very high quality base oils. Okay? Now, traditionally, only Group 4 and above were considered synthetic base oils, right? But as we improved the performance of Group 2 and specifically Group 3 and the quality of Group 3 base stocks, it started to sort of challenge the sort of common wisdom and the market perception. This led to a very interesting case and situation between a couple of the big major oil companies. One thing I will point out is generally as you go up that scale, you go up in price as well, right? With the exception of Group 1 and 2 now being almost basically on par. Okay? But in the late 90s, I feel like I need a Law and Order theme here, gavel sound effect. But in the late 90s, Mobil actually took Castrol to court over their claims for their Syntec product, right? So at the time, Mobil 1 was a traditional PAO type synthetic, and they claimed that Castrol was falsely marketing their Syntec brand as synthetic because it was formulated with mineral oil, right? Now, Castrol had somewhat recently changed their formulation from whatever synthetic base stock they were using previously to this Group 3. And, for a couple of reasons. One, they were getting, similar performance, but being able to do so at a significantly reduced cost, which was giving them a huge competitive advantage in the marketplace over Mobil, right? And they argued that the severe hydroprocessing and hydrocracking of the base oils actually constituted a form of synthesis, right? So this led to a landmark ruling in 1999 where the national advertising arm of the Better Business Bureau ruled that Castrol Syntec, as formulated then, could actually be marketed as a synthetic motor oil, okay? If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it can be a duck, right? And really these Group 3s really do can perform on par in certain applications with PAOs at the time. So this really completely changed the landscape with respect to the market and synthetic oils, and then the availability of synthetic oils for engine oil applications and other applications, at a bit of a more affordable price. And so most of the synthetic oils that are readily available to you now, and most of the synthetic engine oils that you're purchasing, most likely are actually made with Group 3 or Group 3 Plus base stocks. Okay, a quick misconception that I hear all the time, is that all engine oils are the same. Oil is oil. And that really honestly couldn't be any further from the truth, especially right now. There's varying qualities of lubricants, engine oils available on the market. Everything from very high quality, the branded stuff, even into some of the higher quality, independent stuff, right down to what we call the bathtub blenders. And so a really good reference if you're ever considering purchasing, or you're presented with a product that you want to know more about the performance of, there's a great website, a great organization called the Petroleum Quality Institute of America, and they randomly conduct independent testing of consumer, commercial, and industrial lubricants. And if they discover anything that's not on par, they'll issue a consumer alert, right? So. And then, of course, we've got the American Petroleum Institute that I referenced earlier, and their specifications, along with the International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee, which is a collaboration between North American and Japanese engine manufacturers. And they issue these current categories. So earlier on, I mentioned the API service categories. Well, they've now evolved to the current SP category. And that's aligned with ILSAC's GF6A spec, right? And that ILSAC Starburst, which is the first logo that you see on the left, you'll only see those on ILSAC GF6A approved oils and API SP oils. Those kind of go in conjunction with each other. These current SP oils are backwards compatible. Right? So if you've got, a slightly older engine, or if you've got something that's calling for an SN, it's part of the standard categories with the API is that they always make them backwards compatible, right? Now the exception is this sort of, lone wolf over here on the side, this shield. Okay, that aligns with ILSAC's GF6B specification, which is, really driven around fuel economy. And is only for 0W16 fluids. Of course, that lighter viscosity helping establish slightly better fuel economy, right? So not backwards compatible, only for applications that call for GF6B and 0W16 engine oils. Okay. I mentioned earlier the two categories, right? So this is the gasoline category, API SP. Right? And then I mentioned that the diesel categories were C categories. Does anybody want to, posit a guess or take a rough shot at what the S represents and what the C represent? So it's indicative of the ignition mode, right? So S is the gasoline category, so they're spark ignited engines, and the C, diesel compression ignition engines, right? So that's just where they came up with those. And then the letter after, so the P is just, now this iteration of the oil. So they would have started initially, I think it was back in the 60s, I think, with, SA, and now they've just made so many iterations, they're at SP. I don't expect a whole lot of change in this space for a little bit. So these categories were rolled out in 2020, so 4 years ago now, which normally under normal conditions and based on previous history, like we would expect there to be a change. The API kind of like to update their oil categories every maybe 6 to 8 years on the high end. But now as technology advances and these engines get so complex and the specifications get so difficult, the API finds it very, very hard to get everybody to agree, get everybody on the same page about what the next category would be, and so they're taking longer. This category took 10 years to come out with versus the previous category, and I won't expect the next one will come out any sooner than 10 years. What you'll probably continue to drive these specs and these standards is addressing low-speed pre-ignition in direct injection engines, and then obviously a continued focus on lower viscosities with and fuel economy, right? So there is actually a 0W8 in the pipe in the development. So. All right, and then on the diesel side, these are the two current API diesel categories. All right, on the left, you've got API CK4, And it is fully backwards compatible. And I should say, actually, the situation we're in now with these two categories is actually very unique. So these were rolled out in 2016. This is the first time ever that the American Petroleum Institute issued two new specifications at the same time, right? They always just previously updated the C category. But in an effort to get, improved fuel economy, and I personally think, in order to get the American market to start to adopt 30 grades in their heavy duty applications, they rolled out this fuel economy driven category and they called it FA4, right? And A just representing that it's the first ever fuel economy category, right? So, the one unique thing with FA4 is there's only 30 grades, so there's no 40 grades. Right? They're trying to get everybody to move to lighter viscosity in an effort to improve fuel economy and obviously air quality, right? It has limited backwards compatibility now. It had almost no backwards compatibility when it was rolled out in 2016. Really, actually, very few OEMs jumped on and endorsed this FA4. It's only about now, almost 6 years later, that we're starting to see more and more factory fill with an FA4 type fluid. And we don't really sell very much at a at a commercial level because one of the sort of things hindering FA4 growth is that the OEMs recognize that their customers might not want to bring in a special oil just for the 1 or 2 new units that they get, right? So even though the unit might be factory filled with FA4, they will allow service fill with a CK4. Right? And so these CK4 oils, they are available in 30 grades and 40 grades. They are fully backwards compatible. And really just the difference between, CK4 and FA4 really has to do with viscosity and at operating pressure and operating temperature. Really, an FA4 is just allowed to shear down in viscosity just a tiny, tiny bit more than the equivalent grade in a CK4. Right? That's it. And the fuel economy benefit is marginal. We're talking maybe a fraction of a fraction, a couple tenths of a percent. All right? But there is more change coming in this respect in the short term. So these oils were rolled out in 2016. The next category had originally been scheduled for 2026, but it's actually going to roll out in 2027. And that's currently referred to as PC12. The API doesn't like to use their C nomenclature until they actually license it. And this is what PC12 is going to look like here. So if you see the sort of bigger blue box in the background, this sort of represents the chemical box that we as oil formulators have to work within. We can't exceed any of these limits on the current CK4 formulations, right? So we've got a limit for phosphorus, sulfur, volatility, and sulfated ash. Now PC12 is that lighter blue area. And so we're going to see some reduction in phosphorus, reduction in sulfur, reduction in sulfated ash, which I've got a video to explain what that amounts to, but really no change in volatility, right? And volatility is just the, tendency of the oil to kind of, boil off the light ends that might be in there, and that eventually can lead to, gum and varnish and things like that inside the engine oil and inside the engine, okay? One of the things that's really exciting for us is that we've got a product that's readily available right now on the market that is positioned to meet PC12 without reformulation, right? So we're already way ahead of the game. We're 3 years ahead of the game with this new product. This product's called Delos 600 ADF. All right, and so the values you can see there are on the screen in red. Right? So we've actually got 0 phosphorus in this. It's a completely and entirely new proprietary additive chemistry. It contains no phosphorus whatsoever. So we're going to be well within limits there. We're already at half of the current requirement for sulfur. Don't have to worry about volatility because there's no change there. But we're at a significant reduction in sulfated ash, right? So there's sulfated ash. Sulfated ash is just the term for the additives that we use in our engine oil that will actually result in ash because they're incombustible if you burn that sample of oil. And that sulfated ash is a watch point because it can actually lead to deposits in the engine, right? And it's particularly harmful for your diesel particulate filter. I've got a good video that'll explain that here. But so the current limit for diesel engine oils is 1%. PC12 looks to just drop that down to 0.9. We're sitting at 0.4% with our current formula, right? So, and this is absolutely unheard of. We know that our competitors are working on a very similar product because this has huge benefits for diesel particulate filter performance, but they can't get there. They can reduce the amount of ash additive chemistry and protect the DPF, but unfortunately they're not succeeding in protecting the engine. Currently, very, very exclusive to us. So here, I've got a good video here that maybe will do a little bit better explaining what the benefits of a low sulfated ash oil are.
To meet stringent EPA regulations, modern equipment contains diesel particulate filters, DPFs, which remove up to 98% of harmful particulates from exhaust. These particulates, trapped in the DPF, are comprised of combustible soot and incombustible metallic ash. The process of removing soot from the DPF is called regeneration. Normal equipment operation can raise the temperature inside the DPF enough to combust soot. If the temperature does not reach sufficient levels, fuel is added to increase the temperature and burn away any remaining soot. However, ash does not burn away during regeneration. Ash buildup continues to clog the DPF, creating back pressure, which bogs down your engine, significantly decreasing fuel efficiency. Ash removal requires the DPF to be removed for thorough cleaning, resulting in significant downtime for your equipment. So where does ash come from? Believe it or not, most of this incombustible ash derives from metallic additives in your engine lubricant. How can you avoid ash buildup while maintaining critical engine performance? Introducing Chevron Delos 600 ADF with OmniMax.
All right, so as you saw in the video there, that product's called Delos 600 ADF. Again, yeah, sure.
Number one, we're not really dealing too much in this community with diesel engines.
Correct, yeah.
Number two, you don't burn oil in a diesel engine.
You do get...
It lubricates it. Now some might reach in and do it. So I'm a little confused as to even why, other than it's, higher load factors or higher temperatures, that would presumably be the only difference between a gasoline engine and a diesel engine in terms of oil lubrication requirements. Much of the stuff you're talking about here, pollution-oriented stuff, might be relevant to the truck diesel guys, but we're concerned with the oil lubrication but I personally wonder why you have special diesel oils. And in my remembrance, a lot of European oils are designated for either gasoline or diesel with no difference.
Yeah, so in the heavy duty space, right, with truck engines, these are engines that produce a much more higher horsepower. They have different requirements, right? So as far as how the oil gets consumed, it gets into the combustion chamber just through oil consumption, right? Even the tightest engine burns a little bit of oil. You got that oil film on the cylinder liner wall. It gets burned during combustion. Everything that's burned in combustion makes its way through the exhaust stream, and that includes a little bit of oil film that eventually gets deposited in the diesel particulate filter, right?
Diesels are particularly susceptible to that because the diesel combustion cycle much higher pressure, much higher temperature.
Yes, and a big part of it is emissions control, right? So when you burn diesel, you get fuel soot, you get unburnt fuel soot, right? And especially
Diesels are dirtier, that's why they're being banned for cars.
correct.
So if you're going to use diesels, then you need special oils.
Correct. Yeah.
So other
Right.
than that, the lubrication properties are essentially the same between diesel and just need to be heavier duty for the higher loads and temperatures? I mean, I know it's interrelated.
Correct, yep. And, you know, maybe significantly more detergents. They're going to deal with a bit more acid than, you know, than gasoline. You know,
Let's just say in this community, that's not really a big issue.
Yeah. No, this is literally my last slide on it. So just, you know, we're talking about the evolution of engine oil, and I didn't want to, you know, discount the fact that there are diesel oils as well as, you know, gasoline oils as well. So, sorry, there's a question in the back.
It's of interest here because some of us use diesels to pull our car haulers for the Class 6 and the gas powered blah, blah, blah. But my Class 6 run like 65 PSI on the engine oil. Well, my diesel, in order to fire the injectors from the late model Ford, will run 2,500 pounds plus pressure on the secondary high pressure pump to fire the injectors, therefore shear. And the critical load my diesel engine oil goes through as compared to my car gas engine is a dramatically different world.
That's correct. Yeah. And that's, so that's where we actually see, you know, Ford kind of stuck to their guns when CK4 came around. You know, they wanted to actually see higher levels of zinc. So CK4 started sort of down the road of, you know, this is going to get a little bit even more technical, but, you know, low, what they call low SAPs or sulfated ash and phosphorus. And some companies started moving in that direction where they started kind of pulling back on zinc. A big part of one of the challenges with zinc is actually on a chemical watch list in Europe, right? So they're trying to move away from zinc. But, you know, Ford recognizes some of the challenges these diesel engines, you know, experience, and they wanted a higher level of zinc. So they actually introduced their own spec and specifically sort of denounced actually some of these low sulfated ash and phosphorus engine oils. But so anyway, I'll move on from the ultra low. I'm practically done the slide anyway. So some of the advancements that came along that are interesting that you know may have some carryovers. You know, we already talked about the after treatment protection capabilities of these new ultra low ash oils, and we know that the API is going to continue to reduce the amount of these ash-producing additive chemistry because of the impact it has on, you know, the exhaust after-treatment system. But one of the sort of unexpected side benefits that we experienced when we changed our additive chemistry is significant boost in oxidation stability. You know, this new oil has significant, you know, extended life capability over and superior oxidation stability compared to conventional engine oil. And then, of course, the F represents the fuel economy retention piece, which, you know, comes from lower back pressure as you have, you know, less ash plugging up your DPF. You got less of a parasitic power loss on the engine. Actually, one of my strong proponents, one of my early adopters for this Delo 600 technology, he likes to sort of suggest that you use the analogy that it's like running a race with your fingers jammed up your nose. You know, your engine can't breathe. You're not going to have a whole lot of success if you can't breathe either, right? So, and some of that fuel economy retention also comes from lower regens, lower active regens, right? So an active regen is when the DPF doesn't come up to temperature on its own, and you actually have to burn fuel in the DPF to clean out the fuel soot that accumulates in there, and that obviously has an impact on fuel economy, right? So. All right, so this will move us on to fuel additives, and this might actually be a little bit more in everybody's space here, and I got a quick video on how fuel additives work.
Engine upkeep is extremely important if you want your vehicle to last long and drive the way it was designed to. Changing your oil is obviously important. Regular maintenance inspections are important too. But today we're going to focus on something that's really easy to do on your own, and the results are going to restore power, get you better performance, and maximize your fuel economy. A lot of people don't realize this, but impurities in gasoline create buildup over time of carbon deposits in your engine, and more so with lower quality fuels. They form in the intake system where the fuel and air are mixed, and in the combustion chamber where that fuel and air is burnt. These deposits dirty up your engine components, especially your fuel injectors, intake valves, and combustion chambers. Left untreated over time, it can make your engine run rough and cause performance issues. Techron's complete fuel system cleaner from Chevron addresses the issue better than anything available, and if you're one of the millions of people who have used the additive, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So how does it work? As Techron Complete Fuel System Cleaner moves through the fuel system, it works its way into the farthest reaches of your engine where the worst deposits build up. The formula bonds with, breaks apart, and removes those carbon deposits to give your engine a deep clean, resulting in more power and better performance. You'll maximize your fuel economy too. All you have to do is open the cap, pour in a full bottle on a near-empty tank every 3,000 miles, then run your car as you normally would and let Techron Complete Fuel System Cleaner go to work to remove all of those deposits and clean up your engine. It's that simple. So there you have it. Whether you're an engine pro, a do-it-yourselfer, or someone who doesn't like to get their hands dirty, this is one of the easiest low-cost maintenance things you can do right now to clean up your engine components and get your vehicle running the way it was designed to. Check out TechronClean.com for more information and pick up a bottle or two at your nearest major national retailer. Thanks for watching Techron TV. And just remember, whether you're on 4 wheels, 2 wheels, or none at all, Techron's got you covered.
All right. So, that video explains some of the reasons for using a fuel system cleaner, and it's another good reason for using a fuel system cleaner is that the majority of fuel in North America is blended with ethanol, and unfortunately ethanol is hygroscopic, right? So it wants to absorb water, and unfortunately that moisture that it absorbs from the air can lead to oxidation and gum and varnish and deposits in the fuel system, right? So here we've got a couple of examples of intake ports and intake valves. You can see the one after 100 hours with E85 fuel, and then to the right of that after a single treatment with a Techron fuel system cleaner, significantly cleaning up that gum and varnish. Right? You might say, well, does that apply to direct injected engines, right? Because we don't have that fuel air mixture washing over the valve stems anymore. The valves, is it still going to be useful in a direct injection engine? And the answer is yes, because there's other places that deposits accumulate, obviously in the combustion chamber on the piston head, and of course on injector tips. And you can see here again the difference after 8,000 kilometers with a commercial gasoline and after one treatment with Techron, right? Fuel system cleaner. Okay, and so this is, this is really our opportunity. This is a big part of the reason why we were excited to be here, is that we can announce to you that our very, very popular Techron Complete Fuel System Cleaner is going to be available in Canada the first week of October, all right? It'll be available coast to coast through our first source marketer and distributor, Catalyst Lubricants, and eventually being distributed out at retail. So we've got some magnets outside, and there's a QR code on that magnet. So if you just continue to monitor that QR code, you'll get more announcements about retail availability on the product. And actually on the table out there, there's a little poster with a QR code where you can scan the QR code and enter yourself for a draw to win a $250 gift card or gift prize. All right. And so that gets us to question period. Sure.
I've had oil analysis done on my vehicles over the last 40 years. And on the 2003 Suburban, I was using Chevron 94 for quite a period of time. The oil analysis showed a very high lead content as a result of using it. And what I read was that there was no need to use 94 on the vehicle that was being used so much. Now I stopped using it, and 30,000 kilometers later, I went back to like 91 octane. I had the oil analyzed again, and the lead content was near gone. And it was down to acceptable levels. I'm just looking for your opinion on using or on overusing octane levels beyond what the manufacturers recommend.
Yeah, that is a good question. I do remember reading an article specifically related to octane levels. I mean, as you know, all fuel's unleaded now, so any lead that was appearing in your used oil analysis would be indicative of bearing wear, you know. So I can't speak to specifically, I'm not a fuels expert, unfortunately, but so what, I mean, it's been decades since we've been on leaded fuel, and the only area that, you know, whenever I see lead, I immediately just think of bearing wear, right? Because it's a Babbitt layer in one of the Babbitt layers in journal bearings. So.
But the lead levels went away when I crossed the octane.
Yeah.
And I always use on that vehicle, I ran 300,000 kilometers, mobile one, every 7,500 kilometers. I always bought Chevron fuels.
Yeah.
Very diligent in what I was doing, but very surprised with the results.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. If you want to carry on the conversation after, it would be interesting to explore.
Really, one of the most interesting things you said about the synthetic oils was backward compatible. And what everybody wonders with an older car is, can I run synthetics? Is there going to be enough zinc? You get a lot of media literature which saying you need to run a zinc-rich oil in your classic car. There are special oils, companies which make, classic blends and everything. So I'd like to know your views on the most modern synthetic oils, which look absolutely fabulous in every way. They even make a distinction and say they're backward compatible. What are your views on that? Are they really, truly, I don't ever have to think of running a classic motor oil or a mineral oil just because I have an older car?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. You're really challenging the idea of backwards compatibility in that space, right? I think really when they say backwards compatible, they're generally talking about, the few previous generations. Your application here would be obviously a very, specific and special application. There is plenty of documented evidence out there that, flat tappet cam configurations, require a lot more zinc than, what's commonly found in current engine oils. So, obviously in that space, I think it's backwards compatible, but, and we're not necessarily talking decades and decades, right? There are special requirements, special oils for, your type application. You might be better off with something that's custom blended, a little bit higher zinc for the applications that you have. Probably the biggest misconception, I had it in my presentation, I scrubbed it out because of time, but one of the other misconceptions that I was going to address was, hey, can I use synthetic oils in my older engines, or hey, synthetic oils cause leaks, right? And that was somewhat true of the early iterations of synthetic engine oils. A lot of them were either ester-based or contained some kind of ester, because even PAOs, PAO base oils, they're actually, additives aren't particularly soluble in PAOs. So quite often what ends up happening is we blend those additives either into an ester or into mineral oil, and that makes it that much easier to blend into PAOs. But that ester material, a lot of seals are made with ester material, and so it would cause seal swell, and then eventually those seals would fail and leak. That's long since been addressed. Current engine oils have seal conditioners to deal with that if they're to be addressed. And in fact, it's quite a common extra additive that you would see in like long life or high mileage type engine oils, right? Is a little extra zinc and these seal conditioners to help kind of swell the seals up a little bit again, if they've contracted at all from age and heat. So yeah, good question. Backwards compatible does have its limitations. So yeah.
In the evolution of recommended
3,500 miles, 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles, and I've even heard 20,000 miles. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's to me, like, obviously being in the industry and seeing, dealing with countless customers, these engine oils really have become very, very robust. They're very complex formulas, manufactured with base oils that have purity beyond anything that we'd seen in the past. And, we're seeing that these oils can last a lot longer in application and not cause any detriment to, equipment life. I had a different train of thought there that just escaped me, but one of the things, like, again, sorry, going over to the heavy duty side of things, but one of the big changes there is, there's ultra low sulfur diesel fuel now. It's happened a couple decades ago, but sulfur in fuel was a big problem and a big challenge on the heavy duty side, because that would eventually become sulfuric acid in the oil, and it would break down the oil and shorten its oil life. With these lower sulfur levels in fuel and improvements in fuel quality, we're not seeing the same acids in the engine oil. Plus, we've got these really robust formulas that are really capable of handling these extended drains that you're seeing. So sorry, we get the guy in the green shirt first, then we'll come to you next, sir. Sorry about that. So,
I'm more concerned about avoiding wear to my engine than I am about fuel economy. And I worry about the trend towards zero grade synthetic oil. And I'm tempted to put heavier grade in to get better wear characteristics and forget about the oil. I don't think the difference between 5 or 10 and 0 grade fuel economy is enough for me to worry about it. I know for the government standards that tick better is better for them, but for me, I don't think, if I just push the accelerator a bit harder, I'm throwing away.
Yeah.
What's your opinion about that? Am I wrong in thinking that I'm at more risk of wear as we go to zero grade fuel as a standard?
Yes and no. How do you like that answer? We see this a lot, really, right? This concern about moving to lighter viscosity, and is it going to cause, premature wear? And I'm really more concerned about protecting my engine than I am about that, fraction of fuel economy that I'm going to get. Because you're right, there are a lot of factors that impact fuel economy, right? And basically driver behavior is probably the biggest one. From a wear standpoint, though, again, it kind of goes to the answer I gave the other gentleman. Like, these oils are very, very robust. They are capable of achieving these, fuel economy targets that really, it's the OEM that's being pushed, to achieve these fuel economy targets, right? You got CAFE standards on the heavy duty side. You got the CARB standards now that are, the California Air Regulatory Board standards that are coming out in the States. And so OEMs are under a lot of pressure to prove that they're continually improving fuel economy, and, going a bit lighter in viscosity is one of the ways to do that. But I would say that they were able to do that. That's part of where we come in, and where they challenge us is to help them continue to protect the equipment as they're getting pushed towards lighter viscosity. Now, there's always the question of value, right? And what has more value to you, and what do you value as a consumer, right? And you value that engine, you value that more than the fraction of a percent of fuel economy, and in that instance, it stands to reason that, yes, a thicker lubricating film, a thicker oil film is going to give you better protection, but, is it overkill, right? So
if I were to choose to use a little heavier grade oil as regular, tell my dealer, don't put in that zero grade, put in 5 or 10. Am I putting a warranty at risk?
That's a good question, and that's probably one where, we have to work with those OEMs, so we'll always tell you to, basically follow the OEM recommendations. The one thing that I would say maybe a caveat for most people. And, sometimes we go down this road with customers, right? Is in empowering them or enabling them to make a decision on viscosity grade is if you go to the owner's manual, there's usually actually a viscosity temperature chart in there, right? And they'll say, hey, if you operate in this kind of ambient temperature and these kinds of, you can maybe make some decisions on your own that might empower you to be able to say, okay, I'd rather use a more viscous fluid. And maybe you could find an argument that says, hey, it hits this temperature at this time of year. I want to use the thicker oil, right? Generally we try to keep, encourage people to follow OEM recommendations.
This is Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hi, Lynn here from Third Eye View. Welcome to our show today, and I would like to welcome our guest, Jill Wageman. Jill, welcome to the show. Jill does Reiki, and we're also going to talk a little bit about palmistry. She's also a laughter yoga leader. And so later in the show, we are going to get into a little bit of laughter yoga. And that is actually how Jill and I met. But Jill, first of all, let's talk about Reiki. Now, how did you get interested in Reiki? What drew you into that field?
Our daughter is 18 now, and she was on the bus, and her bus driver was Cindy Bennett from Listowel, and she was going to her Reiki classes, and we were talking about it. She said, "You should come." I said, "Yeah, I don't know." And she says, "You should come." So first I brushed it off. The next time when she picked up Ksenia, "Please come." I said, "Okay, I'm going to try it." She said, "If you don't like it, you can just go home."
Yeah.
We walked in that door that night, and I was leaving thinking, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do.
Oh,
so
that's good.
How it started.
Yeah.
4 years ago.
Oh, wow. That's good. And I do understand that sort of thing of, well, if you don't like it, you can quit. Because when I first started into learning how to do readings, I had gone for a reading, and the psychic I went to, who became my teacher, she mentioned about classes, and I thought, well, same thing as you. If I don't like it, I'll just quit. Obviously, I did not quit, and obviously, you kept going. So, what is it about Reiki that really has attracted you?
Oh my gosh, it's my whole world now. I can't go a day without talking to I cannot go a day without just thinking about sending something to Reiki to the universe, or I'll send Reiki to the situation. That's my favorite sentence. At anything, I Reiki to our dog George, to our daughter, to my husband, to the plants outside. It's just amazing how you send it to the universe and it'll change. The whole situation changes.
Yeah. Now,
That's how much I like it.
Okay. Now, I didn't realize that you could use Reiki energy on plants. That's interesting.
Yeah. Talk to a plant. If you know that it's not doing so good, you just go talk to it. And it does. And yeah, you will be amazed that it will actually it hears you, and you'll notice a difference in it the next day, or even 2 days later, or even an hour later.
Oh. Yeah, like I've heard about people talking to their plants, and it makes a difference.
Oh yeah. Even to your food, you're baking something, you're cooking something, send Reiki to look down in the pot on the stove, and send Reiki to it. It'll taste different, taste better.
Ah, I'm going to try that. Now, I have my first level of Reiki, which obviously I am nowhere near, like trained nowhere near to the extent that you are. And when I mean, I'll be honest, there was a time I was quite skeptical about Reiki and whether or not it worked. But I had a hip replacement done about 8 years ago. And some friends of mine that do Reiki, they said, well, we'll send you some Reiki. And I thought, yeah, we'll see. Okay. And honestly, the difference that it made was absolutely amazing. And we, every day the nurse would come in and ask, well, what's your pain level at? And everyone else in the room, they were at 8, 9, 10. And I lied one time and I said 4 because I felt bad because there was no pain.